So I think if you're going to, understand what truth is in a meaningful sense, first thing you got to acknowledge is the fact that every sentence that I'm currently speaking has a truth value. They're all statements of mostly descriptive statements. Like this statement right here is describing the statements that I'm making. Some of my statements are questions. Those are statements. Those are questions. Some of my statements are conditionals, stuff like that. Okay? So, but the point is, almost every single one of my sentences has a truth value. Like the preceding sentence. Almost every single one of my sentences has a truth value. Would seem to be true, depending on how you define almost. Since almost could be quantified specifically, if I were to go back and count all these sentences and figure it all out, I could say, hey, look, 8 of the 9 sentences I've said have a truth value. So do we agree that 8 of the 9, that's the preceding sentence I stated, that almost all of them had a truth value, is in fact true? Well, to understand what truth is, I think one helpful thing, I'm not saying I understand what truth is, but one helpful thing in trying to understand what truth is to go back to the beginning, which always is a nice mental testing ground. Imagine back in the beginning when they didn't have words for things yet, and you got your first caveman, and he's sitting down and he's giving things names. It's like, rock, tree, food. Now the food thing he's pointing to is actually a living animal. It's an ox, okay? So, what's the first incarnation of truth and falsehood? Not in a sentence format, but conceptually the same idea. We have Caveman Og, whatever I said his name was, Froggy Joe, Caveman Frog. And back in the caveman times, they named all the people after animals. So there was frog, bird, snail, wombat. And they were a happy tribe of cavemen. And so anyway, imagine Og is teaching, not Og, I've changed their names, I forgot, Frog. Frog is teaching Bird the names for things. This is before they actually had names, because they were still naming things, but they would eventually be named. The caveman who would eventually become Frog, the caveman who would eventually be called Frog, was teaching the caveman who would eventually be called Bird names for things. So Frog would point to a rock and he'd say rock. And then Bird would point to the rock and say rock. And Frog would convey happiness by smiling but not say anything. And one time, Bird points to the tree. Well, Bird's still getting the hang of it, What's the tree? Says rock. And Frog frowns. No, you got it wrong. But he doesn't say anything. He just frowns. He didn't even shake his head. Just frowns. Because he's unhappy. What's he unhappy about? Well, it's a true-false question, and fucking Bird got it wrong. No, Bird. That's a tree. That's a rock. Okay? And so, I think the moral of this story is, on some level there, we see truth as reduced simply to correct or incorrect label. Correct according to what standard, though, right? According to what what criterion or what judging mechanism or something. Uh, well, correct according to what Frog says. Frog says, I'm the one naming shit. I pick the names, so you have to use the names that I pick, right? So he's saying rocks. The thing I'm thinking of as a rock is a rock. Well, okay, fine. So let's cut forward a bit. Let's go to the point where Frog and Bird are eating dinner. And Frog says, food. And Bird's confused because earlier Frog had pointed to that animal that was walking around and said food. And so he's like, frowns, and they go on with their meal. And the next day, Bird points to an animal and says, food, but it's a kind of animal they don't eat. And, because, Bird's trying to figure out, you said these were food yesterday, and then last night you said the thing we were eating was food. And so, let's go back to this thing. Yesterday you said animals were food. Okay, well, I'm going to point to an animal. Food. He frowns. No, it's not food. Why is it not food to him? Because when he chose the word food, he was referring to an antelope, which happened to be the same thing that they ate last night. Whereas the other guy thinks he's referring to anything that walks around. So they need another word now. And so what ends up happening is they keep food for things that they eat, but they start separating different animal names, etc., etc., etc. So then when you're talking about this exercise, you're really functionally saying what they're doing is they are establishing the truth value of this sentence. This is a rock. This is a whatever. An identification sentence that it just affirms the name of the thing. That's all it does. So when we have a circumstance like that where we're reviewing sort of labels for nouns, and you're talking about things that just affirm the existence of of something, the truth value is reduced at that point to just, is this the correct label, right? So if we have a rock in modern times, or back away from the cavemen, I might call it a rock, you might call it a boulder, somebody else might call it a pebble. We'd probably all agree it's a rock. We may say the statement that's a pebble is false if it's a big rock. We might all agree on that. However, we could certainly imagine contexts in which somebody chooses to use hyperbole and says, talking about their own strength, and can you lift that rock up over there? What, that little pebble? Of course I can. And they're simply using hyperbole, and it's intended to be understood that that's what they're doing, and probably for humorous effect or for self-aggrandizement or whatever. But, I guess that would be objectively false to the extent that we all agree on that it's clearly on one side of the spectrum and not on some sort of gray area. It's not between a rock and a pebble or something. The point being, when we think about truth as that, or using the right label, that tends to, at least for me, return the focus to the fact that truth is about consistency within a closed system. It's not a descriptor of an external thing. Certainly, words don't, within and of themselves, possess truth. They don't contain truth. I mean, we use the word in a lot of different ways. A lot of people would, in colloquial parlance, probably be more likely to say something about truth when referring to issues of deception, as opposed to simple confirmation of a sentence, right? Like, I don't think she's being truthful. She's probably, if you say about that about somebody, I don't think she's being truthful. She's probably not going, if and only if, blah, 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 blah. Then they wouldn't even talk about truth if she were doing that anyway. They'd be talking about validity. No, yeah, if somebody's saying she's not truthful, they don't mean, like, that's objectively false most of the time. They mean she's being deceptive in some way. And she may even be objectively truthful and still being deceptive. And they might still use that word, because people will use words very loosely, you know. And so that's the other issue is especially in English, where I don't know other languages except a little bit of Spanish and stuff, but especially in English, where you've got such a massive vocabulary, you're dealing with a circumstance where you've got a large chunk of the words having very fuzzy meaning differences from other words. And in fact, I think really, if you want to make some hay in the area, you'd want to think about truth through the lens of English prime. Like, see what kind of truth can we do with English prime? English prime, just to be real quick, is English without be verbs. It's just agent, action, and object sometimes. Sentence construction. So, and you have to have agents as subjects. You can't have like abstractions as subjects, which makes it, which is an attempt to remove the metaphor out of English, which is very difficult to do because it's so deeply embedded in what we talk about. We're constantly engaged in a epistemological what? An epistemological something. Blah. What I'm trying to find a word that means a persistent doing again and again of something that is already well known and everybody agrees is pointless and stupid, right? I want a word that says all of that. I'm going to stop here. I might do another one after this. 15 minutes. That's the trouble with philosophizing. You can't even begin to... Every step of the road requires a dozen steps of tangential groundskeeping, you know? Because every single thing you say has to be explained in the context of multiple other vectors, and you're talking. I mean, it's philosophy, language, language. Why do you treat me so badly?